preservation of and increased access to the 92nd Street Y Humanities Audio Archives is generously funded by the National Endowment for the Humanities.
Well, good evening, and welcome to the Ruth and Oliver Stanton About Women lecture series. My name is Susan Engel, and I direct the Adult Division in the Center for Adult Life and Learning. So glad to see so many of you with us this evening. Before I introduce tonight's guest, I just want to remind you of some remaining events that we have this spring in this series. On April 28th, we will be hosting a discussion on women in the theater with Wendy Wasserstein, Anna Devere Smith, and Graziella Danielle. And then we have some other exciting About Women events planned for June. Jessie Norman and Anna Devere Smith will be with us in June, and we also have Letty Cotton Pogrebin and Linda Fairstein, and so be on the lookout for more information on those programs. Some of you might be interested. This Sunday night, Marshall Loeb will be speaking on personal finance and taking control of your finances. And now for tonight. The format is a talk followed by your questions, which we will be taking from the floor, not from cards, but we encourage you to ask your questions from the floor to have an open dialogue. And afterwards, there will be books and videotapes for sale right outside this hall, and our guest has graciously agreed to autograph copies. We are fortunate to have with us a world-renowned sex therapist and writer whose books on sexuality, erotica, and menopause have helped millions of women have a stronger self-image and find greater fulfillment in their lives. Her first books, For Yourself and For Each Other, were groundbreaking and among the first to talk openly about sex and relationships. Our other books include The Pause, Positive Approaches to Menopause, Going the Distance, Finding and Keeping Lifelong Love, The Erotic Edge, Erotica for Couples, and she has also edited 2 erotica collections entitled Pleasures, Women Write Erotica, and Erotic Interludes, Tales Told by Women. She lives in California, so we are especially fortunate to have this opportunity to hear her speak in New York. And she is also on the clinical faculty of the University of California Medical School in San Francisco. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Lonnie Barbach.
This is good. I can't see who's out there. Before I get into talking about how a nice Jewish girl from New Jersey got into doing this, I should tell you I'm at a relative disadvantage. Truly, when I was asked to do this lecture, which was 18 months ago, I said, oh, great, I'd love to give a lecture, but I'd like to do it on menopause and to talk about women's sexuality and menopause and changing hormones and all that kind of stuff. And the last I heard, that's what was being negotiated. And then I forgot all about it. I never heard back. And then recently I just got a message saying that, oh, you're coming to the Y to talk about erotica. So here I am. Let me tell you what I'm going to give you I'm going to meander around a bit. So let me give you kind of a game plan. I'm going to talk a little bit about how I got into the whole area of putting together collections on erotica. And I will go into the different collections a little bit, the differences between pleasures and erotic interludes, and then the new one, the Erotic Edge. And I'd like to do a little reading from the Erotic Edge because that's erotica written by both males and females, and I want to show some of the differences in that. And then I'd like to sort of branch out. I've been doing some work on erotic films over the last couple of years that are written from a female point of view or that are being put together from a female point of view. So I'd like to talk about that and to show you some of that. So we'll follow sort of a wide area. So how I got into this, if somebody told me the day before I started doing this one lecture that I ended up giving to Planned Parenthood people on sexuality, that I was going to end up doing sex therapy and then writing erotica, I would have said, you're crazy. But there I was. I had this job doing sex therapy. Basically, you could only do Masters and Johnson style therapy, and I didn't have a male co-therapist. So I designed what then became pre-orgasmic women's groups. They were groups for women, and the women either they didn't have a regular partner or their partner refused to come into therapy. And in this first group, one woman was faking orgasm and didn't want her partner to know. So I thought, you don't have a partner, I don't have a partner. So I put together these groups that were based on consciousness raising techniques. This was in the early 70s, and did Masters and Johnson kind of stuff in a masturbation program. And in the groups, the women did their homework at home and came back to the groups, and we talked about it, and they did more homework at home. And masturbation was a major part of the women learning to be orgasmic. And about midway into the groups, some of the women were saying, I don't get that aroused with masturbation. I mean, I don't fantasize, and I'm not really used to this. I'm not very turned on. My partner's not there. This isn't working for me. So I said, oh, well, go read something. And they said, oh, great idea. So they went out, looked around, and came back to the group and reported that this stuff is written for men. Some of them said a lot of the themes are violent, they're degrading toward women, they felt objectified. And I started to think, why is it that there's nothing out there written from a female point of view that's erotic? Niacin stories were out there at that time, but those were written by her for men, a particular male patron. But there wasn't anything written by women for women. Now, that was in the early 70s to mid-70s, and at that point I don't think I'd reached 30 yet, and I thought, I don't dare put out a book of erotica. I mean, my credentials were questionable enough already. My work that I was doing was really, I certainly think in New York it was not considered particularly okay. Anyway, I waited about, maybe 8 or 9 years, and then, I don't know if maybe my credibility was good enough or I just didn't care. But I decided I really wanted to put out something that was written from a female point of view that was erotic. And I wanted to do something that was fun. All the work that I'd been doing on sexuality was with problems and people who had difficulties and concerns. And I wanted something that was a spice up a sex life. That was going to be fun. I wanted something that spanned the ages, that were for old and for young, that for straights and for gays and for marrieds and for singles, to really look at women over the whole map. And to feel that it would be okay to write about erotica for women as if you could write about anything else, that it was a part of life. And there was somehow this idea, I think, that you couldn't really be a decent female and be lusty and sexual at the same time. And I wanted to put those two things together. So I started the first book, which was Pleasures, on real experiences. And that was because I wanted to really see what women really liked, what turned women on, not what was supposed to be erotic or what kinds of male images. Can you hear me? What kind of male images were in the culture that were supposed to be erotic, but what really turned women on? So the stories that I got for that book were really interesting. Most of them, almost all of them, were relationship-based. The most important component to women's real, most erotic experiences that they then wrote about had to do with the relationship. It could have been their first love or their most important sexual experience, their most intense experience, the first experience with a woman, but there was something in it that had to deal with, at the foundation, the relationship. Secondarily, there may have been other issues such as the forbidden or mystery, adventure, and other kinds of things, but primarily it was really about the relationship. So then when I did, I got finished getting that book out, and it was really interesting because when I started to do the media for it and started to do talking to people who are talk shows or to people who were writing for the newspapers, the response was, "Oh, great!" And I thought I waited too long. I mean, I thought that people would be a little bit more taken aback by it. So I did that one, and then I wanted to do something that would advance, sort of push the envelope a little bit further. So then I put together the compilation of erotic interludes, just tales told by women. And in that, I used fictional pieces as opposed to pieces just based on real life. And it was interesting because, again, the majority of the stories were still about the relationship. They were still founded on the relationship. But what was starting to happen is that there was more adventure, and there was more mystery, and there was more of the forbidden. And so it's sort of like the edges were starting to get tapped more with this one, more a sense of the moment, of what was going on at that moment. So when I finished that one, I thought, what else do I want to do in the area of erotica? And what I really wanted to do was to put together a compilation that would work for men and for women. And in the past, a number of men had said that, while they may have liked the women's stories, that there was a real difference for them in writings by women and writings by men. And that oftentimes the women's writings weren't explicit enough, they weren't graphic enough, or they just didn't get down to it soon enough. That took too long to get through all this foreplay and stuff. And I thought it would be really nice to have a compilation that men and women could read to each other, that they could share, that they would feel comfortable with and would represent both points of view. And I wanted to do that actually for a number of reasons. As I've continued in my work as a psychologist and doing sexual therapy, I've realized that so many relationships ended up having the sexual part of it kind of going downhill after a number of years. They kind of got bored sexually, or their sexual relationship was tired, that they wanted something that would refresh it. And I realized that what erotica would do was adding something that was special. And maybe it wasn't the erotica per se, but more the specialness that was important. Because I think the sense of you get into a relationship or then you get married, and there's the idea that the relationship is supposed to take care of itself, and that other things end up getting prioritized. And in fact, what happens is that sex gets relegated to last place. Because in your appointment book, there's dinner with your boss and PTA meetings and this lecture or whatever else. And there's rarely make love with my spouse. That's not put in there. So the time that you have with your partner ends up oftentimes being the leftover time. The time when it's late at night and you have to get up early the next morning. And there's not this sense of specialness and prioritization that was there in the beginning of the relationship. In the beginning of the relationship, sort of like they call this spontaneous, that you would make a date and you'd plan to get together and you'd take a shower and you'd get nicely dressed with clean underwear and go out to a little restaurant, just the two of you, and then go back and make love. And that was spontaneous. So I figured with that kind of spontaneity added to a long-term relationship, we would be okay. So the desire was to take these stories and to have them from a male point of view and a female point of view. And if just the act of opening up the book and reading it to one another was doing something that was special, that was prioritizing the sexual relationship. So I wanted couples to be able to do that. I also thought that it might, you could read them before as a way to get turned on. You could read it during. One person could read it during. The other person, I guess, would have to listen or do something else. But it would lead to possibly sharing fantasies with each other. A couple could talk about what they read about and see how their partner felt about it. And if they hated the idea, they could blame it on the author of the story. They didn't have to take any responsibility. There was no risk. It was totally safe. So it allowed, I really felt that it allowed couples to open up their relationship and also to have some fun with it. So that's what I wanted to do. That's why I put together the Erotic Edge. And before I talk about some of the differences between men and women, let me talk a little bit about where I found the writers for it. Largely, and this was different, in my first books, which were all women, I had somehow tapped into a network of female writers. And so I had sent it out to friends and to some colleagues, and everybody seemed to talk to other people in their writers group and other people, and I would get more and more stories back. But I needed to find men as well for this. So I put ads in writers' magazines, and I contacted university writing programs. And again, I used my past authors as well, and they passed on to their friends. And I ended up with 195 submissions, of which I've used 22 stories. Now I have to say, when do you decide that you've had enough? Sometimes when I can't stand to read another bad erotica story again. There's nothing worse than bad erotica. Really. I don't think that bad science fiction could be as bad erotica. Because, and erotica may be one of the most difficult things to write well. Because it's inherently nonverbal. It really has to do with an awful lot of what you're feeling and what's going on and how to write about it and not use cliches and not use terms that you feel are, uncomfortable or too many four-letter words or whatever else is a challenge. So when I couldn't stand to read another story again, that's when I concluded this. And there's one other thing that I forgot to mention. When I sent out invitations, which I did for the other 2 books, and asked people to write stories and to submit them. And I gave them various themes that they could write about. And for the first books, I got the submissions and that was fine. For this book, I started to realize that the male submissions were basically an introductory line that said, we were out on the beach and the sun was blazing on our bodies, and then they started to make love. And it was a whole lovemaking scene until the end of the story. And with the women's stories, that never dawned on me to have to write a letter that said we need plot and character development. These are really short stories. Because in the women's stories, I had to write back people who wrote good stories and say, we need more sex. We need to have more of a sexual relationship here. So it was very interesting on how it aired. And I thought really in the beginning when I started to get these men's stories, I was never going to be able to come up with a volume that had male and female stories. So I sent out another letter saying what I wanted, and lo and behold, I got plenty of good material. The average age of the respondents was 42. And I thought that was really interesting. I mean, that's sort of after your sexual peak. Men were between the ages of 32 and 58, and women between 28 and 56. I shouldn't say your sexual peak, I should say your reproductive peak, because I think there's a great deal of difference here, especially after doing the menopause book. Now, I do think that there's a real appreciation for the erotic that grows, I think, over the years, and a real ability to pay attention to it and to deal with it in a way that may not be possible for people in their age 22 who are thinking about it so much they can't maybe sit down and write about it or something. I'm just joking. Interestingly, a third of the people in the book use pseudonyms. And I was surprised at that, because I thought we had sort of gone beyond that. I had understood when people use pseudonyms for pleasures because they were real stories. I used a pseudonym for mine, as a matter of fact. But for fiction, I was surprised. Although some of the interesting stories that people gave or reasons that they gave was that one was a children's book writer, another one's partner had a political post, and there was a man in the South who worked for Pacific Bell and thought he would lose his job. And there was a woman who said that she was really worried that if her name were in it, she was basically afraid for her safety, that some crazy person would find out who she was and where she lived. So she didn't want to put her name on it. But other than that, most of there were a lot of similarities between the women's writing in both stories. Another major difference was that in the earlier stories, there were no references to safe sex in the single stories, when there were singles involved in the sexual stories. And in the Erotic Edge, there was. And I think that really showed the difference in time, because Pleasures was in 86 and Erotic Interludes was in 89, and the Erotic Edge just came out a couple of years ago. So I basically divided the book up into 3 parts. One part that I had was very male and very female. I tried to show what some of those differences are between the male writings and the female writings. And basically, again, in the female writings, the relationship was the most important part. It was what was going on mentally, what was going on spiritually, what was going on outside the bedroom that was leading up to sex, that was the foreplay, and all of that played a very large role in the women's writings. The men's writings were much more focused on the actual sex and describing that. And for men, the descriptions are very visual. They're extremely visual. You see body parts and description of what people are doing. It's an extremely visual, whereas women tend to use more smell and taste and the emotions and all of that's going on in terms of the sexual experience. And I started to realize that one of the reasons I think that there's oftentimes this dissynchronous thing between men and women is that as a woman is getting undressed and the man is watching her, he's getting turned on. And she is thinking, wait a second, we haven't even talked yet. What's going on over here? And there really is a difference. When I took Pleasures around to the media people, again, which oftentimes I get my first reactions, the male interviewers often said, are there pictures? Not one female interviewer ever asked if there were any pictures. So there's a real difference, I think, in the visual component that's so important for men. For women, there was a lot more mystery or subtleness and use of clothing, half-clothed, kind of half-hidden in the sexuality. Whereas for men, it was much more explicit and graphic. Women used a lot more sensuality, a lot more romance, the knight in shining armor, all the romantic kinds of images, whereas men were more adventurous sexually. There were more threesomes and menage a trois or the forbidden, and were more experimental. So those were some of the differences. Now, in terms of the common themes, there were differences as well. About 20% of the male stories that were submitted, none of which I used, were about forced sex. There were none that were submitted by women. And I didn't use them because I felt that, for something to be erotic, I felt it needed to be consensual, that both people had to be in agreement on it. But there were 20% of the stories, which were quite a few. Now, for women, the most frequently submitted story was an unrequited love story. And here I thought, what is going on? Why are all these women being so masochistic here? They're coming back, they're writing all about these stories of lost loves. And then what I realized is I did get a few male stories, and it had the same theme when I talked to the men and to the women about it. What was really going on is that the writing of the story was a working out of the relationship, that it was a healing process. And I have one unrequited love story from a man as well in the Erotic Edge, and that, again, he said was a healing for him to be able to write it down. Now, for men, a very common theme was anonymous sex. It was sex with somebody they didn't know or knew only briefly. And it had that sense of newness to them. And there was only a couple of stories written by women with that kind of theme. And the one that I used, it turns out, was written by a woman who wrote for a lot of men's magazines. Now, for both men and women, a very common theme was sexual affairs, the outside person, the extramarital relationship. But they were done from very different points of view. For the man, the relationship, the primary relationship, was often an afterthought. Sort of after he'd had this affair, he'd sort of think, oh, wait a second, I don't know if I should have done that. Whereas for women, it was like, should I or shouldn't I, and what does this mean, and how's this going to go? And by the time she got to the sex, she had worked this out, a millionfold in the story. So I thought that was interesting as well. And the last section, by the way, I wanted to, and I luckily got 3 couples. I wanted to get to see what would happen if you had actual couples, real-life couples, writing about their sexual relationship from their different points of views. And they were so different. The thing I liked about it most maybe is it shows how incredibly different good sexual relationships can be, that the spectrum is just gigantic. And that one of the couples, she was an exhibitionist. I mean, she loved to be watched. She loved to show off. She loved to talk. And he loved to watch. He was a voyeur. And you can see in their stories how the two of them fit together. So they were a perfect fit. In another story, it was a really dominant and submissive sexual relationship. In terms of, it actually turns out in real life to be a fantasy, not what they acted out. But in the stories, it reads like that's what it is. And the third one was a very spiritual relationship, where they were both very spiritual, both were practicing Buddhists, both used their sexuality as part of their spiritual life. So those were quite different. And maybe I can read you a couple of short passages to show some of the differences maybe between male and female writing. And one of them I'd like to write is from Bruce Zimmerman. It's called Waiting for Claire. And I think actually his story is maybe the most on the female end of the male stories. And it's the easiest one for me to read. Some of them I would have a hard time reading. Okay. Gina assessed me for a moment or two. Then slowly, I should tell you what this is. This is a story, just starting out here. This is a story about a couple who've been together for quite a while. And she had earlier in her life, before they gotten together, had a relationship with another woman and her partner in Morocco. And as the story unfolds, they are waiting for Claire. They're waiting for this woman who has called her and said she's coming to town. And they're both waiting, and they don't know what's going to happen, but they're spending a lot of time talking about this relationship, and this is the beginning of a sexual scene. Gina assessed me for a moment or two, then slowly unbuttoned her blouse. I leaned against the window and watched her. The rain was coming down so hard I could feel it pound against my shoulder through the glass. She was deliberate, taking her time with each button. She let the blouse drop to the floor. Then she reached behind her back with both hands and unclasped her bra. The thin strap slipped off her shoulders and the bra fell next to the blouse. "Any other problems with my wardrobe?" she asked. "Your jeans." Gina kept her eyes on me for a second. There was no coy smile, no coquettish turn to the edges of her mouth. With her eyes still locked with mine, she slipped off her sandals and pulled her jeans down to her ankles. She stepped out of them and kicked them aside. Panties, too. She removed them without hesitation and stood before me completely nude. "Why don't you close the curtains?" she said. "Nobody's going to look in," I said. "Sit down on the couch." She did, right on the edge, knees together, and turned to the side, both hands palm down on the cushion. "Lean all the way back and spread your legs." Gina eased back into the depths of the couch, drew her knees up, and slowly spread her legs. Her breath was shallow and her eyes were on me. "Like this?" she said. "Wider." She spread them wider. I walked over to where she sat, and I'm going to stop. It's like women's writings. It's just teasing. You can see how incredibly visual it was. Now I'm going to read another one. This is called Glorious Reunion by Hope Katz. And in this story, it's a woman who has had this major love affair with this man, and they have split up, and he has just recontacted her, and they're going out, and this is their first experience back together again since a period of separation. The bed, him falling atop me, gentle knowing smiles, caught in the act of opening. Touching him, touching me, taking off his jeans, naked him, clothed me. Should I pull off my long skirt or let it fall around his shoulders, cover his head, lips on skin, skin on lips? He leaves me dressed. His mouth finds breast beneath bodysuit. He lingers above me, his tongue talking to me with warm licks, pushing me deeper into the coolness of his black and white sheets. He raises himself up, smiling that gorgeous smile. His lips meet mine. I'm his. Again. Oh, the joy, the recklessness of want, his nakedness, his silky, warm nakedness. Pull closer. That body, the feel of his strong, hard muscles against me, delicious. My tongue lingers on his chest. Fingers find the bottle of brandy. I spill a drop and watch it dribble toward the nape of his neck, then douse him plenty and drink from his skin, intoxicating passion. He regains balance and arms himself with a can of whipped cream, drawing perfect circles of whipped whiteness on my nipples. He uses his tongue like a spoon to lick them perfectly clean. Soft licks that get harder as I do. Sucking bliss. We finally find our way to the promised bath. Cleansing warmth engulfs the passion, dims the fire. Talk ensues amidst candlelight. Flickering sounds meet ebbs of light. Sips of wine cool hot, thirsty throats. Tickle happy tongues. In the water I find his hardness, and then it goes on. But you see, women sort of up and down kind of has more of this kind of a sense to it. It continues on that one too. All right. So I want to give you some of the differences in that, and then maybe switch subjects for a couple of minutes. Oh, you know what I forgot to do? I wanted to show a videotape, which I was supposed to do earlier, but I'll do it now. And this was supposed to be in this place. I told you I was going to do a menopause lecture. This is supposed to be when I'm starting to talk about the importance of erotica in a relationship, or the importance of prioritizing a relationship. And I did a video on sex after 50, where I got to interview an awful lot of couples in their 50s and 60s and 70s. And this one section is about sexual innovation that I like very much. Gives you an idea that, first of all, you never have to stop having a good sexual relationship. And it was a good intro into erotica. So can we show that?
People who have been married for a long period of time often experience a problem more devastating to their sexual enjoyment than any of the problems faced by the single person: boredom. And while complaints of sexual boredom can sometimes cover up other problems, such as anger with a partner or a basic discomfort with sex, it's also true that some couples who've been together 30, 40, or more years have gotten into such a deep sexual rut that their lovemaking has lost the excitement and passion. While the initial excitement wears off in every relationship, there are ways to rekindle your desire. This doesn't mean giving up the part of your lovemaking that has become routine because you enjoy it. It just means adding to it.
I like perfume, and I don't mind dousing myself all over, putting on sexy gowns, sexy robes, all that. And makeup. I think that's very important.
My wife likes to walk nude around the house, you know, and that doesn't hurt in high heels.
I always wondered why he never bought me nightgowns. And I realized now, because he never wanted me to wear them. And it's great. It really is. It does make a difference, let me tell you.
We've always had the process of going to a restaurant and dressing up, and Hope has a wonderful wardrobe of sexy clothes that she can wear, particularly if we're at home rather than in the restaurant, of course. And so we really build it up, and there's a lot of touching that's involved.
We've gotten porn videos, for instance. We have gotten the various sex magazines, and we've read avidly letters to the editors, sometimes to each other and sometimes just on our own. And we get lots of ideas from those sources. We'll take ideas from any source.
Treat sex as a form of grown-up play. Surprise your partner. Check into a hotel for the afternoon. Create a romantic evening by dressing for dinner and setting the table with your best china and silver. Put on your favorite music. Turn the lights down and dance in the living room. Make love on the living room couch in front of a fire. Wear sensual underwear. No, you're not too old. There are silk or satin boxer shorts for men and gauzy peignoirs for women. And don't forget your partner's favorite cologne or perfume. From time to time, you may want to put energy into creating a sensual atmosphere. Light a few candles. Turn on some soft music. If you do have intercourse, experiment with different sexual positions. The woman on top or the scissors position can help.
Turn it off now. Thank you. So you can see you're never too old. Anyway, back to erotica. This was not made as an erotic video. This was made as an instructional video. But I have, for the last couple of years, I've been working with Deborah Shames, who's a woman director. And actually, she did a lot of the dramatic parts of this, to put together some visual erotica that was from a female point of view. Because most of the material out there, even the explicitly sexual material, has often been put out from women who've been in the porn industry. There hasn't been anything that's been put out from sort of the entertainment industry that's really dealing with sexuality and not trying to do it just as, a 2-minute scene in the middle of a movie. And it was really quite a difficult task because it's a very hard line to walk. It's a more difficult line to walk than in the written erotica because it's so explicit that it leaves less to the imagination. And what we found out, again, the things that we tried to do was, again, to look to the relationship, that all the stories are based on the relationship. The sexuality comes out of the relationship. The relationship is a strong part of it. And maybe we can just show a part for a sense of romance. I'll tell you, this couple, this actually was a story from Erotic Interludes called Berlioz and the Ghetto Blaster. And it's a woman who's in her mid-40s, and she's decided to get away from men and to get away from stress and to go paint in this little cabin, which is falling apart. So she's hired this handyman who rides on this motorcycle, and he fixes everything up. And he's your traditional 25-year-old male who likes classical music and who's a good cook, and he breaks the stereotypes in that direction. And so they've sort of had this eyeing thing on each other for a while during this part of it. And at this point, she gets really sick, and she's gotten a bad cold. And he's starting to take care of her. And one of the things, he's gone out to buy her some groceries. When this starts, he's just come back in.
Where are you taking me?
You'll see.
So you're going to undress me too?
You want me to?
I think I can handle that one myself.
Debussy. You want me to scrub your back?
Actually, that would be nice.
Your bathtub needs caulking.
So, this is what you do for a living?
Bathe women.
No. Move around working on other people's houses.
Yeah, pretty much.
No other plans? Ambitions?
Maybe. Feeling better?
Yeah. This is nice.
Look, I'm just not the 9-to-5 type.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to pry.
I was settled down once before. I was married for 3 years. And what? We're still friends. I love her energy. She's a great businesswoman. It's just...
What?
It's just... I don't know. She didn't need me anymore. Left about 1.5 years ago.
I'm sorry.
You're burning up.
Hot kisser.
No, I'm serious. You should be in bed.
That's what I was thinking, too.
Showed you that one because the focal point of this story, the way that it changed, was a result of that kind of a conversation where there was really a sense of who he was, that she was able to get a sense of him and a part of the relationship, as opposed to just that it was a physical relationship. Now, the other thing that happened in doing women's erotica, I'm going to stay down here because I do a couple more clips in a row. In doing erotica for women, was that we needed to really have a storyline and to have actors that could act and people who could carry lines out, which we couldn't really find in the porn industry. So we had a choice that either we had to do simulated sex and have acting in a storyline, or we had real sex and we had no acting or storyline. So we decided to create something different and tried to do things that had better acting and had more conversation and more humor. I'd actually like to show a piece now that does deal with fantasy in the relationship, that does deal with fantasy as a part of the sexual relationship. And in this one, this is from the Hottest Bid. No, this is from the Hottest Bid. And the scene that takes place is this. It's not a couple. Actually, you find out later in the story that these are really two good friends, and the woman is trying to get pregnant, and this is her friend who's acting basically as the sperm donor. And part of it is that it's a good friend, and he has to get over the sense of being, being turned on in the story. And so what we have here is that their ability to play and to fantasize in the story as part of their sexual process. So you can start that.
What are you doing here?
I forgot my watch.
Your watch?
Yeah.
Oh, right. Where did you leave your watch?
Well, I think it was down here, but I didn't know anyone was going to be in here. I could come back. I'm sorry. I don't want to disturb
don't
you.
be silly. Well, I can help you look for your watch if you want.
Okay. I think I might have dropped it under or
here?
The pillows maybe, or...
See, because my husband's not home right now.
Your husband?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, and I wouldn't want to find the watch and think that there was anything going on in here.
Yeah.
I can help you. I can have you in and out in a second here. Let's see. Feel around in the crack here. Tell me what you think. Can you feel anything? Oh, wait. I feel something hard. Wait, maybe
you
that's...
do?
Yeah, maybe that's...
Well, maybe I left something over here. Underneath over here.
Well, maybe you got to feel in this crack right in here.
Yeah?
See, put your fingers in there. You see? Maybe it fell under here. What do you think? Maybe it's, maybe it could be any place, really. Maybe it's... I shouldn't be doing this.
No.
I shouldn't be doing this.
Your husband's gonna be home, isn't he?
In a little while. Can come over anytime. Anytime he's not here. I have a little while. I have 10 minutes.
10 minutes?
We're gonna be quick.
Okay.
I have 10 minutes. What?
I looked at my watch. I know I wasn't supposed to do that, but I forgot that I had it on, and I know I was supposed to have lost it, and I don't know. I blew it. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. It's okay.
I'm just not very good at this.
Take your watch off. We'll hide it.
Yeah, but I don't know. Maybe we should try it tomorrow or something.
No. Wait. We can solder it again. I can lay down again.
Yeah?
Yeah. No, wait. I got another idea. Okay, so what would my name be?
Your name?
Yeah, my name.
How about, just what to do. Linda. I want you to be Linda.
Linda, okay. Okay, and your name will be...
What do you want me? David? Okay. I'm taking it.
And where are we?
Okay. I'm your next door neighbor, and I've been watching you undress through your bedroom window.
I like that.
For months. You never closed the drapes, and one night, you see me watching you, and
I like that.
you touch yourself, and then you motion for me to come over.
Okay, we can turn it off.
Maybe I did, maybe I didn't.
We can turn it off. Thank you. Actually, that one came out of the two people zone imaginations. That was not scripted when we did it. And in fact, one of the things that we did when we started to do these stories is to film the erotica is that I would sit down with the actors and the actresses in the beginning, and I talk to them and have them talk to each other about what was a turn on sexually, what was a turn off, so that they really started to get to know each other in terms of what they liked sexually, what they didn't, how they felt, and that became an important part of it. Another important part we realized after the filming of the first one, or actually the second one, was that you never save the sex scenes for last. Because what would happen is that so much tension would build up about the sexual scenes because it was really stretching for the actors and actresses because the sex scenes, I haven't shown them, but they're much, what happens in order to build up the eroticism is that you carry the scene out for a longer period of time. And in order to build up sexual tension, usually in sex scenes in movies they're a couple of minutes long, but what happens is as they go on for longer is when you start to feel more turned on. And so actually one of the funny stories is that in one of the movies, the guy was very worried that that his penis would be shown. And we said to him, look, we're not doing that. We absolutely understand your SAG actors and actresses. This is not what we're doing. And it's very important to us that not happen. But he was really worried, so he decided to wear a sock. So he put a sock over his penis. A white sock. I mean, so then what you see is these flashes of white, coming out of here. So those scenes didn't work out very well. And then that didn't work out, so he said, okay, well, we'll put shoe polish on it. So they shoe polished this whole sock, which then got all on the actress's lingerie. So it was a real mess. And we realized that part of that was because we waited until the end to start shooting the sex scenes. And so after that, we started shooting them sooner, and it worked out much better. What other kinds of things about it? But that basically, in these movies, the couples and the relationships evolve through their sexuality. That the sexual part is a very important part of who they are and an important part of the storyline. And it's sort of a trick to walk a line between not losing the storyline for the sex and not losing the sex for the storyline. And I think maybe I'll show you this last one because it's really a scene of extended foreplay. And I think it's very much from a female point of view, where there's still clothing on and the foreplay takes a period of time, and it's very female. So can we show this clip? This is from this couple's been married for 10 years, and were on the fritz, and so they decide they're going to revitalize their relationship by going away to a motel, and she finds out about his fantasy during that, and she pretends that she's going to act it out, which has no relationship to this.
Watching. We're gonna do this my way.
What do you mean?
Agreed? Agreed?
Well, yeah, I guess.
Now, you're gonna do everything I tell you to do, or else.
What's the or else?
Or else you don't get your else.
Now, in that amount of time, we would have probably had about 4 sex scenes in pornography. So what we were trying to do was really trying to create something that was much more from a female point of view. The sets were closed, which meant that only the actors were on the set, and that people were off stage, who were not part of the sex scene, so they had privacy and there was quiet. And the director was giving instructions from off scene as well. All right, I think that's most of it. There's a lot of those scenes have gauzy curtains or things around them that are make it much more mysterious or elusive, and so they're filmed a little differently in that way. Any questions? Yeah. Do women like them as much as men do, right? Do men like them right as much as women do? So far it seems that they're much more geared toward women, although there are an awful lot of men who like this kind of erotica more than pornography. But there's still a lot of men who think, if you don't see genitals, it's not erotic. And if it takes too long to get down to it, and it's not graphic and explicit enough. So we tried to hit a medium, but it's definitely the female side of the medium. Other questions? Yeah. Well, the sex is part of the relationship, but that's true. That within this last one, for example, it's a 10-year-old marriage, and what they do is they rejuvenate the relationship through. He ends up telling her about a fantasy that she's had of him watching her with another man, and that's a fantasy that she's then going to act out and does various things to try to let him think that that's what she's doing. And in the meanwhile, they're building up their sexual relationship between the two of them. The actual sex is happening between the two of them, even though this fantasy is happening out here. That's adding the heat to it. So, you know, when you say, I don't know if that answers your question, but when you say the fantasy is not your fantasy, it's not the fantasy of every woman that you know, okay. Well, it was the fantasy of somebody's because that's how we got it here. You know, that's the other thing. When I did the books of erotica, for example, I read tons of stories, and then I would give them to other people to read and to give me feedback on them, on the ones that I thought were well written and were good. And the stories I used were very often the stories that one person said was fabulous and the other person said was the worst one in the group. Because the sex is so individual and unique that what's a turn on for one person is not necessarily a turn on for the other. So, you know, in this amount, we've done a couple of different stories, but they're not going to be everybody's fantasy. Yeah. Mm. Now, see, this is interesting. The oldest people who submitted stories to me were in their late 50s. Okay, so I don't have stories from 60s and 70s and 80-year-olds. Okay, maybe I had one in one of my books that was from somebody in their 60s, but it largely is for people younger than 50. But that's not because people in their 60s, 70s, and 80s don't have sexual fantasies. It's because that was a culture in which it was not okay to talk about it and write about it. There's a very different culture that takes place, which means that when I am in my 60s and 70s and 80s, I'm probably not going to be like people who are in their 60s and 70s and 80s now. That who you are now is going to be what you'll take with you into that age group. So it's not like, here's what happens to people in their 80s. It's sort of like if you were like this in your 20s, you're going to be like this in your 30s and your 40s, and then up into your 80s. So they're a different subgroup. Can you retrain a 70-year-old? Well, some people can. You know, it depends upon if they want to be trained. A lot of it has to do with desire and interest. And that doesn't even have anything to do with 70-year-olds. That can go across the spectrum. You know, what happens when there's one partner who's, you know, much more adventurous sexually than another partner, or much more interested sexually, has a much higher frequency level of desire than the other one. And those are issues that need to get worked out in relationships. You know, I mean, we can talk about some ways if you want to, or if people are interested. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the question is it's a chicken or egg phenomenon. Is it that young men had a lot more pictures, you know, during their early sexual arousal? They masturbated to pictures, and that's what is arousing to them. So visual, you know, the visuals become very important. Or is it that men were much more visual, which is why there were pictures to begin with, you know, for men? I mean, I don't know. But that women definitely respond more to the verbal, which has a lot of other levels to it. And that's the difference that I was explaining earlier, which is that men's writings are much more graphic and explicitly sexual, and women's are much more about the emotions and the feelings and the smells and the taste and the whole environment and all of that. Yeah. I should have given you the microphone for this because it's a very interesting question. You know, what's going on? If that women have, and by the way, I'm not sure that if you asked a man that if his sexual experience were limited because he was more visual or was focusing on the visuals, if that was in any way made his experience less than. I think that it's not a comparison of which is a better experience or what's going on. It's going on from inside the person. I'm talking about of how it gets expressed in writing, you know, what we're seeing in terms of how the person's portraying it. But I think there is something about women's erotic sense, and you know, maybe that you start to think about how come women have been repressed sexually, how come religion has been so negative in terms of women sexually, and so that maybe there is a very strong desire. There's a very deep expression of sexuality if it were unleashed, and they're keeping a little damper on that. What she's saying is that part of this may have been because men were worried that with women's intense sexuality and sensuality, that if it weren't contained in some way, that then she'd be going off with all these other people. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's your microphone. No.
I'm just going to stop. Okay.
But in those societies, isn't there a heightened sensuality among those women more so than in our free society when they're allowed to be?
When people, well, you know, I haven't done enough good cross-cultural studies to tell you. I know that there are some cultures where women are very free sexually and are not, it's not inhibited, it's not prescribed. So it's possible to, in some cultures, to be sexual where it is okay, and there's other cultures where it's not. But this is a lengthy discussion on this that I think I'd like to sort of move it away from it, except to say that in this we're seeing that women do have a very lusty sense of sexuality and sensuality. It's very strong, and that was the reason why I wanted to do all this stuff in the first place, was to have it out there. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Inhibited or anything. I felt
She's in her 60s and didn't feel inhibited when she was young.
and my friends too. In other words, when I hear that people sort of are teaching people things, like I think, what, you know, that's number one, the first comment I have to make. And the other thing I wonder about is, you said, I think before, that people over 50 or 60, that there's a cultural thing where they're not free sexually. I don't know if I understood.
I said there's a difference. No, I think there really is a difference in, not in the sexual freedom or the experience of sexuality, but in the freedom to feel that it's okay to talk about it, or the willingness to talk about it in general. Not for everybody. Yes. No, in public. Okay? That it's much more of a private individual kind of a thing. Yeah. Right. This is a good point. Can I talk to that? He's saying that there's research that shows, and the basic research that was done was taking a photoplethysmograph, which is an instrument that you put into the vagina that measures blood flow and lubrication to show arousal. And what the studies are showing is that women who watch hardcore pornography are physiologically being aroused, but they're reporting that they're not feeling that aroused. Okay? And what we may be seeing is a difference between what is sort of a mental and emotional arousal process, that just because you're physically aroused, I mean, it is possible, by the way, for a woman to be raped and to lubricate. I mean, it is possible to respond physiologically. I'm not saying rape is the same thing as pornography. I'm just saying that there's a physiological arousal process. But if you're really talking about the emotional and the mental part of it, which is very important to women, so just the physical process, I think, is not as sufficient. Now, men, I think there's somewhat of a difference because of women having this sort of hidden arousal. Okay, we're not aware of it. Okay, unless we put our finger down there, we don't see if we're lubricating or something. It's not as conscious of it. I think for men, the process is much more immediate. You see that there's an erection there. And I think that for men, there's a more of a tie-in onto the physical arousal process that then feeds back in some ways that may not be as present for women. That may be it. He's saying, is it possible that some women are feeling that emotionally they shouldn't respond to this, and that's why they're not? And I guess my point of view would be, it's not so much that there's a conflict there, it's that the real part of the arousal process has to do with your relationship, the emotions, the connection that is tied in with the sexuality. And that is a really important part of sexuality. Not for every woman. You know, there's lots of women who can have sex and not have a relationship. That's not necessary. But for a lot of women, for the majority of women, and certainly much more for women than for men. Okay? Not that there aren't men who feel that way about it, but I'm just saying that it's skewed in those two directions. Yeah. Well, I think I meant by the forbidden, it's just anything that was, not the culturally acceptable sex between, a heterosexual couple. That there was a threesome, that was a taboo. Somebody was being watched or being listened to, that was a taboo. Sort of those things that are just outside, and I meant that forbidden sort of in a cultural kind of sense, not that it's really forbidden. Does that make sense to you? It's just my term for it. Yeah. Yeah. It's very complicated. If you look at yourself and you take two people and you say, here's one person, and how come they're more artistic than this person? Or they're more interested in going to the movies than this person. Or they like spicy food and this person doesn't. In all sorts of ways, we're very, very different. And I think our sexuality is simply one of those ways in which we're different. Now, how does that happen? I think it happens like anything else. It's a part of us. It has to do with what we've learned, what's okay, what's not okay. Probably hormones, probably attitudes, probably, physiological dispositions, all sorts of things. Life experiences. So all of those play a role. The real issue is how to, in a relationship, to create a relationship where the couple is able to have their sexual needs met with each other, and so that it works for both of them. Other questions? Yes. Yeah, well, you see, is there a technical difference between pornography and erotica? One person's erotica is another person's pornography. The definition that I use is that pornography is degrading to women, it's objectifying to women, it's often violent. And erotica doesn't have any of those elements in it. So that's what I use. Yeah. Do I think that women's sexual items, erotic items, are going to be more available? They already are. Now you have stores that have sexual products that are videotapes, and they have lingerie, and they have books, and they have all sorts of things that are designed for couples, that are designed for women and for men. There used to be sex shops for men. Now there are places that you can go as couples. There's the stuff that I've done is erotica for women. I think it really is. That may be one of the major changes, is that sexuality is now clearly as enjoyed by women, and women expect to enjoy it as much as men always have. All right, let me thank you. If you have any other questions, it's 9:30. I'll just be outside to sign books and to answer questions. Thank you.
Thanks for listening. For more information on the 92nd Street Y, New York, and all of our programs, please visit us at 92ny.org.